Okay, hello, and thank you for watching episode 7 of Dano Says So. My guest today is somebody I've known for over 30 years. I first met him as a fanzine editor, and Plain Truth came before Dear Jesus, yeah?
Yeah.
So that would be when we met. He came into much bigger notoriety later as frontman for Born Against, Men's Recovery Project, Wrangler Brutes. But in the many, many years since then, it's pretty much been writing. That's kind of been your tentpole. And out of 3 books, the one I'm really going to focus on today is his most recent. That's Mutations, The Many Strange Faces of Hardcore Punk. Oh, Sam McPheeters, thanks for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, sir. Okay, right off the bat, and if it's not clear what I'm asking, I'll put some flesh on it. But why this book? Why this subject matter? Why now at this point in your life?
I realized that I was in a point where I was forgetting things, and so if I was going to do it, this was the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had made enough progress on my mental health that I was capable of writing it. But also when it started, it was just supposed to be a collection of previous things I'd written. And it was just going to be a book about music. There was
it seems like it's an anthology. Correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like an anthology of previous work with a few fresh pieces mixed in.
Most of it's new stuff. I'd say
Really?
less than a quarter is old stuff. The main one is that Doc Dart profile, which was much longer, and I thought about putting the longer version in, but there was no need. I mean, 8,000 words is a lot, and 11,000 words is kind of too much, unless it's something sensational, and I didn't cut anything that couldn't have been cut. And there's some other small pieces in there, but the small pieces were largely rewritten. Like there's a chapter about Green Day, which was part of a not wonderful Vice column that I did, and it wasn't really anything when I did it. And then I realized that could be my way in to discuss that whole world, the whole Gilman Street world.
Which is what largely that piece becomes about to me.
Yeah, I just use it as an excuse to discuss that, which is how I treated most of the band stuff. A lot of those pieces aren't necessarily about the bands, and the Doc Dart piece is about Doc Dart, but it's also a way for me to explore a sort of a similar period in my life when I did things that were a little parallel to Doc's shenanigans.
Well, here's why I asked you why this book and why now is I don't know whether to call it defensiveness or that I catch a certain vulnerability, but and I noticed it when you and I, last time I saw you in person in 2009, but there's a very clear distinction you make between your years actively involved in punk rock and now, and it seems like you feel damaged by some of the things that went on then, or maybe that's self-inflicted, or maybe just vulnerable to the results of some of those things, and I don't want to overanalyze, but it informs the voice, and in my opinion, in a really interesting way.
I definitely thought that I had a unique take on it, and that I don't really celebrate anything that I've done,
mm-hmm.
which is more just about me and my character. I'm that way also with any other output I've had, writing, art. Although I like the books that I've done, I'm aware that there's going to come a point where I probably won't. But that also means that I'm really excited about the new thing that I'm working on. Also, everybody gets weird things if they're in the public eye. I'm guessing that you probably have some weird things that people approach you with where you're like, how did that become a thing about me? And the thing about me, Sam,
mm-hmm.
is that I hate my old bands. But I don't. I've never said that. I just said I didn't like them. And there's obviously there's a world of difference in between those two things. And so everything that I felt I needed to state, I just stated. There's nothing more I could add to most of the really vulnerable stuff in that book.
Mm-hmm.
But that's an interesting piece of feedback for me, only because it's very rare, I find, with writing that I get any feedback from one person to the next that's in any way identical. Everyone reading is so subjective, apparently way more subjective than music, and people just bring their own stuff to it. I mean, it's fascinating in some ways. The feedback on any of these books. There was a thing, and so the first novel I published, The Luma Ruin, an old friend from high school read it, and he wrote me, he's like, I'm sure you're getting a lot of feedback about the big mistake in the book. And I was like, no, what is it? He's like, well,
Okay.
you know, Mythbusters really shattered the whole thing, and it was about one little detail on like page 96 about a vehicle hitting a wall going at 50 miles, something really like mathy.
Right.
And I was like, oh yeah, I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be polite. Like, yeah, you're right. Like that's, oh, what was I thinking?
You were polite about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason not. I don't take any of that stuff personally. Also, there is a massive mistake in Mutations that no one's caught, and it's the weirdest thing. It's so, I'm not going to point it out, but it's just a factual thing about something that doesn't matter, but that I got wrong.
And it probably drives you batshit.
It does, yes.
Yeah.
As
Well,
much as
I'm still reading it. I'm well over halfway through. But as I was sitting here and going, shit, I'm 3 hours out from interviewing Sam, I started cherry picking a few pieces in the back third.
Mhm.
The reason I talked about vulnerability or even regret or distaste is you can be kind of savage and be kind of direct, probably to the point of damaging some relationships and your assessment of things, but you're no less brutal to yourself, which is, I think, wise and also probably endearing to the reader.
I'm way more brutal with myself than anyone else, but I'm conscious of the fact that emotionally I feel like that gives me the right to critique everyone else, but I know that's not really how life works, I tried very hard to pull my punches. It's not meant to read as a book in which I settle low scores because I don't care. And also that would be really boring. I had one person that I needed to say something shitty about because it's a shitty person, and they're in there in a little footnote, and it's just kind of like get in, get out, 2 sentences.
It doesn't come across that way to me. I think partially because, particularly in a lot of stuff that has to do with borderline feud type material with old hardcore bands, man, most of these fucking people are raising kids by now. And I gotta believe
You'd
that
be
even
surprised who holds on to old beefs, but yes,
they do. Because I should think. I come across some of my supposed beefs from back in the day, and they're some of the funnest people to run into. It's disappointing when then later I'll see them resurrecting it, but I mean, the classic one, the classic piece of straight edge, blasphemy would be sitting five middle-aged men deep across a bar. It's Dan and the guys in Chain of Strength.
I was unaware that there was a problem there.
But that's Southern California garbage, and like the way you like to frame a lot of these conflicts, it's completely unimportant. But no, we spent the '80s despising each other, and I don't think we're going to attend each other's birthdays now. Yeah. But we were able to have the ironic beer, and it was a good laugh, And that's what I'm saying is I would like to think I would like to think that people age out on a lot of the things that we obsessed about when we were younger.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, absolutely. Here's my weird thing. This is follow up on that thought. One of the other pieces of feedback that I get from this book is people use the word cringe a lot. Not that the book makes them cringe, but that I'm discussing memories that are cringy. And I've had to undergo a rather violent assessment of the last 30 years just since the end of May. So just in the last, 6 weeks, 7 weeks since Floyd's murder. That I spent a lot of time cringing, for lack of a better word, at a lot of my like angry young man posturing. And some of that I'm realizing now was correct. Like there was a column I wrote for MRR at the same time you and I were doing our columns, right after the Gulf War, and I ended it with the sentence, "Fuck you, America." And I've always been like, oh God, that's so cringy. And then a month ago, I was like, oh, wait, no, that's the only rational response to what happened. I was correct then. I have been deluded for the last 30 years in thinking that there's anything in there to be ashamed of. Like, that's a rational thing. Well, and it's just like a soap bubble popping. It's been a really weird experience that I haven't discussed outside of this talk now, because who wants to hear from me discussing that.
It has been, of the interviews that are upcoming for this thing, and my tens of millions of followers, it's been one of the interviews that's been more asked about. And I mean, there's, on the one hand, it's because a lot of people have fond memories of your absurdist sense of humor serving them up some real curveballs in life. And I think also just because you have a unique voice. So I would counter that with, you'd be surprised how many people want to hear your thinking on something like that. And I thought about it. I thought about talking about Born Against and talking about, patriotic hymns and all of that, and how it sits against now. But I kind of want to respect the fact that I'm pretty impressed with you as an author. And as a guy who's fairly egotistical about his own use of the language, I don't say that to very many people.
All right. You and I have a really weird relationship.
The fact of the matter is, the world's on fire, and as long as I've known you, you're a damn smart guy with a pretty wide worldview. So how are you rolling with things right now?
Oh, I'm fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's fucked up. I have always had really serious anxiety and depression issues, which I discussed some in that book. Hopefully not too much. Like a little dose of that stuff goes a long way, and you can weigh down. I could weigh down my writing by really going heavier into it. But all of my shit has just exploded since this happened. And I noticed going to protests, my anxiety was just not manageable, that I just
really
felt like something horrible was going to happen. I'm not exactly agoraphobic, but I get it. I get how people wind up never leaving their house.
Mm-hmm. Did you experience any older man's guilt, or even old male guilt specifically? Because there's a part of me, out of all the places that I've lived, in Oakland and Long Beach are probably the two most dear to me, and things really popped off in Long Beach, and I didn't go down because I didn't really know whether I'm supposed to be that author of that space in that moment, or whether I'm supposed to use my mileage to comment on it.
Yeah, it's very confusing. One of the weirdest things is, before all of this happened, in first stage COVID, so really April, I started reading the most horrible shit I could find about white supremacy, partially as research for something, and partially because I'm really interested in the question of where the bottom is. Like, does that make sense? We know where the top is. We know the names.
Well, what I'm translating that as is probably not what you mean, which is, to me, the obvious bottom would be, a replication in 1930s stories, late 1930s behaviors, hitting the United States.
Right. Okay. Right. So yeah. So I read. I wound up reading a bunch of books on lynching photography, and one of the things that I took away from it is just that I still, as someone who has been, I feel like, studying white supremacy for my entire adult life and writing about it for decades, that I don't really understand the depths of it. So in the 1930s, even by the 1930s, so lynching had been going on at that point for 40 years, the way that we know it. And so already thousands of Black people had been lynched in the US. Even then in the 30s, anti-lynching activists couldn't approach the subject head on. They had to be oblique about it because Black lives were so disposable. And so the way that they came up to fight lynching was to say, oh, lynching hurts white people. And there were these phrases like, for
well,
every...
They gave white people skin in the game as a method of resistance.
Well, sure, in some cases, but what I mean more is that anti-lynching activists were explicitly saying the biggest damage, like if you look at lynching photos, you're horrified by all the white people standing around, sometimes smiling. Sometimes there's kids smiling at these public events that thousands of people came to. And so what anti-lynching activists were saying is, this damages the white soul more. It's only a moment of pain for the Black man, but it's a lifetime of psychic turmoil. But that's how they had to do it. That's how they had to market it. Because even by the 1930s, like my grandparents were alive then, they couldn't just come out and be like, what the fuck? You can't do like ISIS stuff in the middle of the town square and take photos of it. That's wrong.
Right.
So I had all this stuff I wanted to say about it, but I wasn't quite sure what to do with the material. And then this happened, and I thought maybe I should just shut up for a while and try to read as much as I can. But yeah, I don't know. It's just
Yeah, but knowing you, you'll do something creative with it.
hopefully. I mean,
yeah.
I haven't done much today.
Well, damn it.
This is my big event for the day.
What are you doing? What are you doing talking to me? God damn it.
Yeah. All right. Bye. You and I have known each other a long time.
I'm thinking 87 or 88.
Yeah, 88.
Okay.
Which means you're one of the very few people that knows of me before I was band guy. I met you when I was like fanzine weirdo.
At the risk of insulting you and your achievements, which sounds very lofty, and I think I wouldn't blow any smoke at you with your blood-stained door behind you, but my biggest points of admiration, the biggest smiles I still get, are still from Fanzine Guy, because you pulled some moves and lobbed some moments in self-generated press that weren't anything like I'd seen, and I was pretty well versed in that world. I mean, just even stupid shit. Okay, you did an interview with Verbal Assault when you were Fanzine Guy, okay?
Yeah.
But you framed it as if, and I don't know whether you were, but as if we were all together in a Denny's or something. And you interrupt the text of the interview to suggest that one of them stopped to order a chilled stein of goat's blood.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I did an interview with Soulside, and at the end of the interview, then I said, then the interview descended into an all-out orgy of fisting, fucking, and sucking. I don't know those guys at all well enough to make that joke. That's not appropriate. And I forgot about it. And years later, I opened it. I was like, oh, old fanzines. This is fun. And then I just Well,
do you remember Josh Stanton?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, that kind of shit, and this is why you're on the East Coast, essentially a phone or a pen pal, that kind of shit used to double us over. You know, and that's necessary and powerful. I think not meaning like powerful, like, it has some meaning, but it suggests a talent or a wit or a flair for the absurd that most people would not have instinctively run with.
Okay. You're going with that and not full-blown mental illness? I thank you.
If you want to frame it as mental illness and that serves you some purpose, that's fine, but I'm going to call talent. Okay. There have been people who I have dealt with in this thing who have a real talent for curating enemies. I have a certain limited talent for it. You're coming across to me right now like you're aware that you do that you're capable of birthing long-term resentments. Does that bother you?
I mean, hopefully it's in the past.
It's just something we kind of already talked about here, but honesty is probably always going to have its tax, and particularly really acerbic honesty,
Yeah. I'm not nuts about how much I antagonized people during Born Against days. And it's a side question, but was that weird? Because I feel like I had a real personality switch back then, and you knew me before that switch happened. So was that?
Yeah, but here's the thing: I didn't have much contact with you during Born Against. Born Against is the exact same time as 411. We were both constantly on the road, and we didn't play together.
We stayed at your house once, didn't we?
Yeah, you did.
And I left a diary at your house. I remember that.
Did you? I don't remember that.
Okay, good.
You guys stayed at my house when, by then, my mother had passed away, and my house was a neglected, dog piss stained nightmare of a place to shack up. But there you were.
Unlike everywhere else we were staying at on tour, yes.
Good point. Yeah.
I had a weird. This is way too far off from your question. Sorry, but I don't think I ever told you. I had a really weird experience leaving your house in '88.
Okay.
I had a train ride across the desert back to Albuquerque to my grandmother's, and I had just bought those plaid pants. You and I went out somewhere, and I bought these golfing pants. They're the ones I'm wearing in my photo in Mutations. And I realized that I wasn't the kind of person who would wear weird pants, but I could become that kind of person. And so on that train ride, I've only had this happen to me a few other times in my life, 2 other times, where I just my brain reorganized itself. And I think part of that was as a result of that trip, which is so weird. You were in Huntington Beach at the time, right?
I was in Huntington. We made a run to San Francisco. I don't know whether you frame it this way in your memory, but we hopped a train the night after my mother's funeral.
No, I remember that. I remember
Yeah.
showing up and you telling me and me being kind of shocked and saying like, do you want to not go somewhere? But I think I talk about that trip to San Francisco a little bit in Mutations, where I mentioned you brought me into the MRR office.
Yeah, I noticed that you kind of gracefully did so without doing so by name. That's good, because it would have been a weird, that whole framing would have been a weird element in that story. You know,
there was a point I went through the book. I had a bunch of people I mentioned, and it felt like it read wrong. So you got excised from that. Sorry. I'm going to footnote also, though.
My head is still enormous. I'll be fine.
We're all very concerned about your ego, so that was kind of like.
Yeah, my subtlety and my retiring nature is a problem.
Yes. Wait, we're talking about enemies? It's a bummer.
What I'm doing is I'm probing for guilt or regret or things like that. Because I
feel like I've kind of made a career out of that at this point, haven't I?
That's the thing, and I don't think it's necessary. It's a funny thing.
Yeah, no, you're right. I agree with you. It shouldn't. I need to. I feel like it was necessary in writing Mutations because there are so many books about hardcore that are just celebratory. And whatever, that's fine to a degree, but that's really not me. And I think it's really important for someone to write from the perspective I do, which is like, this is a great thing. That doesn't mean that there's like glory that I want you to take in, because I don't feel that way. So there's another chapter, if and when there are more, the book's in the second printing right now, at some other point in my life, in a subsequent printing, I might add a few chapters. There should have been a chapter on Kill Rock Stars just because they're interesting, and I was, all my bands were on that label. But there really should have been a chapter about my record label, which I didn't put in there. And one thing I just ran out of time, and I was talking about with a friend, and I realized, well, if I write a thing about Vermiform Records, there can't be anything putting down Vermiform, because like I kind of
the artists with
overplayed my hand with that shtick. No, well, no, I like all the artists on that label.
No, I'm saying if you take down the label, I'm saying if you take down the label, do you think that by osmosis you would have been taking down the artists?
I think there's a risk that it would be perceived that way. But also, I just don't want to write it that way. I think there's a lot of funny things to write about running a record label, especially the way I did it, which was not cool. A band came over once in like 1998. It was like, good news, guys. I got the alternative press to fuck off. They're not going to write about you. And I was genuinely happy. I was like, I did it. They're like, what, you mean you got us, you took press away from us? I was like, yeah. Isn't that cool? And that's not exactly how you run a label. There was a point where my dad came to visit, and it was this first experience like, oh, I run a business. I could have my father, come check this out. And it was really cool. And then late in the conversation, he picked up some record. I'm like, oh, that's a noise record. And it was just the needle scratch noise. He was like, wait, what do you mean noise? And as I was saying, I started sweating. I'm like, yeah, it's just a bunch of noise, Dad. It's cool. Like, that's not how you run a business. What was the question?
I don't remember the question. Let's get back. I like where it landed. Let's get back to method. You said something in there, and you mentioned humor almost as an aside about how to write something. But it's a necessary ingredient in most of your stuff. And there tends to be a rhythm where sometimes it's just the repetitiveness and the subtle irony of something makes it hilarious. I'm thinking specifically, there is a diatribe in Mutations where you try to define what punk rock means to people, and you list a good at least 10 lines of definitions, and sort of refer to the fact that you'll find somebody who believes passionately that this is what punk rock is, and you'll find somebody who feels equal passion the opposite. But it just goes on, and they're all dead on, and just the volume of it starts to be funny. That takes a certain ear, that takes a certain awareness. So congratulations on that.
Thanks. There's one, really what it takes is time. Like I can't write funny in real time.
Really?
What I can do is very slowly identify jokes and place them, but I've deadline writing kills me because I can't put any jokes in it.
Yeah, well, here's the funny thing to me. You've written a lot more on assignment than I have. Yeah, right after my divorce, I took a stab at freelance journalism.
Oh, that's
and
right.
did-
We talked
and,
about that. Yeah.
and did maybe 3 or 4 pieces. And the editing process and being at the mercy of editors enraged me to the point where I was like, thank God I grew up punk rock, because whenever this bug gets a hold of me, I'll just create a new fucking website and do a new thing. Whenever
Yeah.
I did a 527 on a website during Occupy. I did a political website during the general election before that. And
Yeah, I
anytime I
remember.
want to bitch about music, I can find somebody to back me on those. You, like, for instance, you've done a lot of musical critique. Were those pieces largely on assignment? I mean, was Doc Dart on assignment?
No, Doc Dart was, I reached a point where I just got, it was 2 things. I got really fed up because I knew I wasn't going to get any work anywhere. And I knew there was this great story. So I contacted him through Alternative Tentacles, bought a cheap plane ticket, got myself a place to stay in Ann Arbor, and I just went and did it with no buyer. And then it sat for a year and a half. No one wanted it. I couldn't get anyone to look at it. And it just happened to be this weird semi-coincidence that a really good friend of mine, who's also an incredible editor, wound up working at Vice and had offered me something. And at a certain point, I realized I no longer hated Vice and that it could be a good outlet for it.
Vice, who shot down probably no less than 10 pitches from yours truly.
Oh, shit. Are you serious?
Oh, yeah, I never got through the door there.
We can have an offline discussion about that.
Well, let's have an offline discussion about that.
You have some fans there. Well, yeah, we'll take that up at a different time.
In any case, this is about you, and this was about the Doc Dart piece.
Right. It's horrible getting rejected, but it's also horrible dealing with editors. Everything.
I found editors much more troubling than rejections.
Well, the thing about editors, my take on it was you can hit a plateau where you get a good editor and then suddenly everything clicks into place. Like having a good editor is magic. And that's what I had with Jesse for a couple of years. It's someone who really gets that they're working with you and they want to make you not look like an asshole versus, I mean, I could go toe to toe with anyone on horror stories of editors. I've had editors change words on me.
I had editors change the gist of a story about a family learning to move on after their father was killed in Mosul. And they completely changed the slant of the story in what they chose to excise from it and everything else, to the point where the mother in the family was furious with me. And that was kind of my final straw with editors.
Yeah. Yeah.
The story added to their pain instead of helping them along.
Yes. Oh my God. I can only imagine. I mean, at least for my things, it was like someone made me look like an idiot writing about Eric Clapton. Well, so what,
Yeah.
But that's horrible. Were you given a chance to look over the edits or did they foist them on you?
The process got long because I kept fighting them tooth and nail. They were taking, I turned in an article called Family of the Fallen, and it was intended for Father's Day release by Emis Publishing. They do glossies all over the country. They're based out of Chicago, right? And by the time it printed, they ran it as Iraq, a love story. And it was about the man who had come into her life and was helping her raise her kids now, and who had known the slain father. And their relationship wasn't strong or in a good place or certain to survive. And the editor was determined to frame it as a feel-good story. And, she found love, and the only man who understood her loss had nothing to do with what I fucking turned in.
Yeah. Do you feel that
that's me taking a big chunk of this space? I apologize.
Do you feel that an editor like that needs to be punished? Because here's where the enemies thing gets weird. I will maintain lists of people who've wronged me like that. And it seems important, not for me emotionally, but for society, that person is punished at some point.
No, I just walked away.
Okay.
I pretty much vowed never to submit another article at that point to anybody at that point. Which I mean, you and I have friends who have accomplished a lot in journalism, and A.C. Thompson, people like that.
Yeah, of course.
Well, but they're going to tell. One of the first things Adam told me when I started messing around and submitting pieces with, this is never going to be any way to make a living. That the only money is in television, and that's not what you're sniffing around.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird that there are also plateaus within that world, the film and television world, where writers are taken really seriously, but there's more avenues where you are the lowest person there. And you exist solely to give them content that can then be stepped on and besmirched with your name attached to it. It's nuts. It's like the whole thing with interns at hospitals having to work 30-hour shifts. Like, why is that? And the answer is, well, that's how everyone's done it. And I mean, you wouldn't do that with an airline pilot, you know. It's just, there's all this stuff in the world that just has momentum and it keeps going. And I feel like that relationship of the editor versus writer it's definitely part of that.
Well, something like Mutations. How big a role did post Sam editing play in it?
Almost none.
Okay. There's one thing that's different about the way you and I write is I was reading old interviews with you, even though I thought about just doing this thing cold to see how off the conversation would be, since we don't really see each other not remotely often.
Invited you to several of my Christmas parties, Dan.
Yeah, I know you have. Anyway.
We're only an hour plus away, so.
Yeah, well, you brutally outshined me at the only spoken word we've ever done together, so fuck off. I'm kidding. But anyway, where was I going with that? God damn it. Oh, the editing process, this, that. You mentioned somewhere in some of the interviews that I read today, spending, 10 months or years even sometimes on a rough draft. I barely do rough drafts at all.
How do you mean that?
Meaning I write much shorter pieces than you do, but I also tend to, other than looking for mistakes in grammar, run my stuff pretty pure and close to the original impulse.
Yeah, I don't think that's bad. I mean, all of my writing rules and techniques, whenever people ask me for advice on it, like, it's so tailored to me, you have to be me.
I wasn't finding fault in it. I was asking about it because I'm
I'm saying it's interesting that everyone is so different that way. Like, people occasionally have glimpsed my computer screen, and I use color coding for everything. Yeah. And it looks like a crazy person. It looks like a manifesto or something. And also I use spreadsheets. Like, there's just stuff that's just me. And so that makes total sense that would work for you. You're saying you thought that did work?
No, it does. Writing is a larger passion than music for me. But I took 9 years off from music and went back to it. And going back,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I took about 9 years off, and I do a band now. And going back to doing music in a present tense band was probably the healthiest decision I've made in the last 20 years.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. For one thing, I mean, was going through a really bad time, and I wasn't making enough noise. I wasn't opening the valve enough.
Yeah.
So
I remember there was a time when it really helped me to just know that I would have a good half hour a day of being able to yell at people.
Exactly.
Like, that really helped. Yeah.
And one of the reasons that this podcast that you and I are doing right now exists is because quarantine silenced that. And I'm not really writing right now, and I just needed some noise. And it literally got to me where it was like everything that I'm picking up through mainstream media and that I'm reading online is powerfully negative. And while I don't expect to get a lot of uplifting content from people, I at least want to be able to discuss the world and my passions and the creative passions of people that I know and people that I'm curious about, which is why there's a lot of old farts on this thing. Right. Because these are literally people I wanted to talk to again, with a few exceptions.
Men in their late 60s, like both of us.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of colostomy bags off screen in this thing.
Oh my God. There's like 3 on the floor right now. Hey, I'm not going to get a good segue into this, but do you remember that you and I were going to write a book about hardcore like 30 years ago?
I remember a lot of different things tossed around. That specifically vaguely rings a bell.
Nothing got written, nothing was planned, but I remember I called you. I was really excited, like, we should write a book about hardcore together. And I don't know if you were being polite, but you were like, yeah, let's do it. And then I told Adam and a few other friends, and they're like, no, don't do that.
What was their take on why not to do it?
Their take on it was that you will never be able to express this thing to other people. You're going to bring in squares. Like, it wasn't a very rational argument, which in Adam's defense, I wasn't making rational arguments at that point in my life either.
In life in general, and I always knew you better than I knew Adam, again, as far as these friends that we'll have in this thing where you know, hopscotch and touch base every 10 to 15 years. You know, I haven't seen Adam in 25 years, but I always remember him having a little bit harsher filter and a little bit shorter fuse than you.
That honestly might say more about how I behaved in California. Like, it's almost like I had different personalities depending on where I was.
Oh, yeah?
Southern California was real, like, be on your best behavior type stuff.
Well, what I remember is staying in the New York apartment, you know, the one that was pretty goddamn close to CB's.
Yeah.
When no Fernandez stayed there, I remember Adam proselytizing a lot that weekend. Not so much.
That was prime Adam. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Jesus, that place.
There are a lot of strange legendary came out of that trip. That was one of the better. That 3-day run back east was one of the smarter things we ever did.
That was a fun trip. I have some weird photos from that trip.
And if you have them, send them. Maybe I'll figure out a way to weave them into this thing.
All right.
Yeah. We're getting around the time where you and I were talking about these things can go on forever. But there is something I wanted to ask you about. It's just a really broad philosophical question. You mentioned several times in Mutations a distrust of community or a fear of the notion of community.
Yeah.
You know, being part of things, right? How does that jive with the fact that, I mean, your whole adult life now, you've been creating things for public consumption, which, you know,
well, many of those
implies
things.
a kinship with the reader, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, good question. I'm not quite sure of the answer. The root of that goes back to something that I have not discussed in public, which is that I grew up in a cult, and I've been taking some time to process that.
Are you being serious with me? Because I can't tell.
Yeah, I am. I know
Okay.
that's weird, right? Yeah, no, I did. It wasn't like a death cult, you know,
Mhm.
but it was bad shit happened to adults and to kids, including me, and it's taken me a long time to come to terms with it. That was my introduction to community, and all of the things that I saw in that world, so we're talking about kindergarten to 4th grade, 5 years, were just replicated over and over again. First in my college experience, and then in like squats that we stayed, and all that weird, like actual serious hierarchical community stuff in the East Bay or even in San Francisco, ABC No Rio, all those things kind of connect back to that early bad experience I had as a kid. And at some point in my life, I'll probably figure out how to write about it, but I'm not in any rush to do it, although a lot of those memories are getting a little wiggly now. But there is definitely a contradiction there.
Mm-hmm.
I just think the answer to your question maybe is that I tried to be, the parts that I enjoyed the most were private. I had more fun spending a summer literally just in my room by myself doing a 20-page letter set booklet for the Born Against CD than I did almost at any point when I was on the road with Born Against. And I remember being a little puzzled by that. So it just seemed weird to not mention that in the book, but I guess I would imagine that without that crucial piece of information about my childhood, that it wouldn't really make sense. I also noticed that everyone else really gets a lot out of community, that's just like a recurring thing. And it's like on that.
We should go a little bit long on this one. I think this is good meat. To flesh that out a little bit more, you and Aaron Comic Book Bus get into an almost identical conversation with a little less backstory on your end, where you're sort of comparing experiences and perceptions of maximum rock and roll.
Yeah.
Right? Thing is, we can distrust that kind of community. We don't have the same life experiences, the same makeup. But I felt on the outside in a lot of these remarkable spaces, the Bay Area in general, maximum rock and roll epicenter. I felt on the outside but recognized. I felt square peggish, but I felt privileged to be up against like just this heaving mass of extraordinary personalities and remarkable achievements, right? And I wouldn't trade it. You know, Bay Area people and people I met through Bay Area people make up a huge part of this series of podcasts, right? But conversely, Youth Crew doesn't make me feel that way at all. you know, my connections through Revelation Records and a lot of those associations, I don't, and I wasn't always on the outside of that, but I don't
Yeah,
necessarily
you were
appreciate
kind
the
of like
kids
our
that.
spy into that world for a while, I remember.
What I get from, I guess the point I'm making, which I don't know if I knew what I intended to say when I started, is I think it depends on the community for me.
Wait, I'm
You
sorry,
know?
can you repeat
I
that?
think at the end of the day, I'm sort of an intentional outlier myself, maybe not to the same degree, but I think it's based on the character of the community. It's a case-by-case basis, you know?
Yeah, it's what I was trying to communicate in the book is I distrust communities. It doesn't mean I dislike them. It's strictly it's a personal thing that just goes back to like when the factory settings were put in. Like it's not going to change at this point. And it makes me genuinely sad that I don't think I'm going to be part of any more communities in a serious way. I'm just more comfortable doing things in a solo way. It was cool doing this book tour. I had fun, but there were a lot of things that there were times, there have been multiple times, but even on this last book tour a couple months ago, where I thought like, you know, maybe am I on the spectrum? Like why, you know, like it's kind of work to make eye contact with people and my emotional responses are off. And I don't think that's it. I don't think I am autistic, but there's some stuff that happened to me as a kid that
It's pretty sinister that I smile when you said that, but I don't think so either. So go
okay.
on.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I was trying to communicate is I really, in a non-ironic, non-sarcastic way, I do envy people who really get a lot out of communities. I wish I was one of them, but the reasons that I don't are pretty bedrock and have pretty kind of horrific details that I'll probably get around to writing about at some point.
All right. Well, listen, I'm going to cut it here. I do hope maybe you find some of those photos. And like I said at the beginning, I want to thank you for doing this. Not exactly the conversation I expected, but
I'm always throwing people curveballs, Dan.
Well, no, see, and that stuck with you even here. But the fact of the matter is, you know, I don't never seen anybody else take the stage dressed as, you know, one of the founding fathers. So, you know, you made your
bit of a fetish.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, thank you, Sam.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Talk soon.